You put people into a position of fear for their lives, literally, and history teaches us they will do anything, they will give away anything to preserve their life. And I think Bermuda stepped up like every other country and did the exact same thing. We made people feel, unless you do as we say, you will literally die.
Oh, you mentioned ethics, and one of the concerns that you have raised repeatedly is that there needs to be an ethical review of COVID policies. Why do you believe it is so important for Bermuda to assess or formally assess what transpired?
And now we're into 2025. I can tell you that I've had some very unusual cancers that I haven't seen in my whole career. I came back here in 2002, then all of a sudden I'm getting 2 or 3 of them in 1 year, and I'm like, where did these cancers come from?
Even the wearing of the masks. Speaking with an educator, they were saying to me that they have found since COVID, children are coming to school with more speech impediments than they did in the past, because when children learn to speak, they look at the lips, they look at the formation of the words. Mm-hmm. With the wearing of the masks, that was significantly reduced.
What is your message to Bermudians about how we move forward?
Take the responsibility of your health back from institutions.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of The State of the Nation with Dr. Stanley James, as we continue to address issues affecting the residents of this country, no matter what form those issues might take. This evening, we're going to be talking with Dr. Schuyler or Dowling, depending on which part of the island you're from. Now, Dr. Dowling or Dowling, let's get straight into it.
Okay.
You have been, well, outspoken is perhaps an understatement, an outspoken advocate for medical ethics and patient autonomy here in Bermuda. Looking back at the COVID pandemic, what do you believe were the biggest challenges in how Bermuda handled it?
Well, I think, like you said, autonomy was really put on display and then subjugated to do as we say. You put people into a position of fear for their lives, literally, and history teaches us they will do anything, they will give away anything to preserve their life. And I think Bermuda stepped up like every other country and did the exact same thing. We made people feel, unless you do as we say, you will literally die. And that proved to be not true.
Unless you do as we say, or unless you follow these precautions.
Right. You follow, not necessarily, we don't have to follow it, but you should follow it. But yeah, that was the thing. I mean, I grant that there was a lot of ignorance. Obviously, it was a new viral strain. We didn't know a lot about that particular strain, but science and medicine, historically wise, taught us some basic facts about how the immune system works, who was most susceptible versus who wasn't. And we could have done it a lot more targeted, like some other countries, so that we could preserve our living, preserve our freedom, our dignity, and give people choice. I think choice is really key to practicing good medicine.
But there was choice, wasn't there? Either you take the vaccine or you don't. However, there will be consequences and fallout if you don't.
Right. I mean, ethics teaches us, however, that there should be no coercion when you are trying to present, somebody to do something. Saying that you don't have to do it, but I can't keep you employed, or you don't have to do it, but then you'll have to go and spend $1,500 a night in a hotel that you can't afford, doesn't sound like much of a choice.
It was foisted onto us?
Into us in general. And there are many people who to this day feel very grateful that the government did what they did, because from their point of view, the government protected them. They feel that, they did everything right, and those who push back, well, that was on them. Unfortunately, we don't have much compassion to people when it didn't affect us personally.
Now, you mentioned ethics, and one of the concerns that you have raised repeatedly is that there needs to be an ethical review of COVID policies. Why do you believe it is so important for Bermuda to assess or formally assess what transpired?
People who do not look on history and learn from it will repeat it. And this has happened before. Look back as far back as the Nazi regime, where doctors were in cahoots with the government and doing very what might be considered cutting edge science, but at the cost of literally people's lives. They treated them literally like animals. I don't know if we treated much people any different during the COVID time. That, if we just continue to say
that's kind of stretching
harsh,
it, isn't it?
Yeah, that's harsh.
Yeah.
Life hurts. I mean, medicine is harsh. I mean, I've literally seen people die in the hospital that, to my opinion, didn't have to die if we had just opened up our ability to be a little bit more relaxed on options instead of saying do it our way or else. And the problem is, who gets to pay the price other than the families who have lost loved ones because it didn't happen to work that way?
Now, around the world, we've seen where there have been an increased incidence of premature deaths, cardiac complications, as well as aggressive cancers in vaccinated populations, or at least there is that belief, there is that trend of thought. Do you think that Bermuda should be looking at this data, seriously looking at this data, and conduct its own health review?
Do I think they should? Yes. Do I think they will? No. When you have a person review themselves for the possibility that they did something wrong, normally they don't look too deeply underneath the hood. For a long time, we have said that Bermuda should be keeping better data on the illnesses of Bermuda because we worry that there are too many cancers, even before this happened, that there are too many types of cancers, that there are too many whatever, too much diabetes, too much whatever. But if we keep looking overseas for the answers instead of looking in our own backyard, how do we know that every time we clean our roofs, the runoff isn't actually poisoning us? How do we know that, everything that we dump into our oceans isn't having an effect? How do we know that, God forbid, every time I'm driving my scooter behind a bus or a truck, that I'm just shortening my lifespan? The only way you know those kind of things is to keep the data and then review the data.
And it must be Bermuda-specific.
And it has to be Bermuda-specific. And that's been shown. I mean, we have populations. We use a study called the Framingham study to look at cardiac risk. That is a kind of a global look at people in general. But there have been countries that when they actually looked at their own population, that population didn't fit into that study. And they had to change the way that they reviewed cardiac risk in those populations. If you don't look at your population, you're going to potentially make errors. And I think we make a lot of errors. But Bermudians are very good at just accepting things, good, bad, or otherwise.
Don't you believe that perhaps with proper education that might change? And who's and you were just about to steal my thunder. Good luck with that. And whose responsibility is it to provide that education?
Well, I always...
You, Dr. James?
No. I tell people, do not put that power in anybody's hands, any government hand, any institution's hand. It is up to you to become educated on any topic that revolves around your health. You have one patient, that's you. Everybody else, I have 30 patients a day. The government has God knows how many people that they oversees, and insurance companies, it's business as usual. You can't leave it in their hands. You'll always come out, the house always wins.
Now, public trust in institutions, including healthcare, there is a belief that was affected by the way decisions were made during the pandemic. Do you subscribe to that notion? And if you do, how do we restore confidence in medical care?
Well, I mean, we look right now in the United States where they have measles outbreaks going on currently.
Yes.
And to a certain extent, there is less vaccinated people for measles because they lost confidence in vaccinations in general. Because the tagline was, this is just like any other vaccine. And if you do that, then you're basically saying, if this vaccine was dangerous to me, obviously all of them are. And that wasn't the case. Historically, we have a lot of data behind the current measles vaccines and some of the others that we've used generationally wise that we can feel more comfortable saying, you take it, you don't. But once again, the clarion call for COVID was everybody step up and take the vaccine. It's safe, like sugar.
Do you believe that it proved to be safe, or do you believe that the views that we're hearing expressed now, hey, before COVID, before people took that vaccine, there weren't these many problems?
Mm-hmm. I think both of those can be true. I think there weren't that many problems before COVID. period, whether it was the vaccination part of it or just getting COVID. But at the same time, I think people don't want to talk about it. It's uncomfortable to talk about uncomfortable stuff. So people would rather say, let's just get on with life. Problem is, a lot of this stuff goes on around them, and it's very difficult to pinpoint it as it's because of this. Just think if you, and I don't know your vaccination status, and to me it doesn't matter, but there's a protective mechanism that the mind does to protect you against you. If you took the vaccine and then found out it's causing people to die, that will play on your mind.
On your mind, it would.
Yeah. So rather than believe that, I would prefer to believe they died. I'm okay. You're okay. It's just them. And I think that's the way that most people can rationalize this. Even during the time, people were saying, how dare you do this? And even as data came forward to say it's not as safe as people saying, or it didn't protect you from other people from getting sick, it was still like, you should still take it. I did it and I'm okay. We always refer to life through our own lens.
Have you seen evidence of what is being suggested that is occurring in other jurisdictions happening here?
In terms of?
In terms of the effect of the vaccine, as we mentioned before, increased cancers and such. I mean, it's been just, a couple of years since?
Well, I mean, COVID, March 2020 is when we shut down the world. The vaccine came out the following year. And now we're into 2025. I can tell you that I've had some very unusual cancers that I haven't seen in my whole career. I came back here in 2002, then all of a sudden I'm getting 2 or 3 of them in 1 year. And I'm like, where did these cancers come from? And many doctors have chosen to just say, just treat it. Don't ask why or where, because we can't do anything with that. A lot of times there's a saying that don't do a test unless you're going to do something with the results. What are you going to do with the results of finding out that somebody died from COVID versus with COVID, or from the vaccine versus with the vaccine, if you're not going to do anything with those numbers?
Based on your knowledge, did people die with COVID or from COVID?
I think both. You got to remember that the problem with COVID in general was the spike protein. So this virus had spike protein, which was very clear to be toxic to the body. But then we developed a vaccine that did what? It produced spike protein. Now, in theory, it was supposed to do a very small amount in the muscle of your upper arm. However, after the Pfizer documents were released, after we had more data, it suggested that it didn't stay in the arm. It traveled to all parts of the body, that it could reproduce after, it was thought that within a short time it would stop reproducing, but it would continue to reproduce. So now you catch COVID, your body treats it, it gets over it, no more spike protein. You get the vaccine, you produce spike protein in your muscle. Later on, you're producing spike protein in your leg, in your testes, in your brain. Where does it end? And that's the problem. We never did enough studies. We just took the word. And I'm guilty of that. I'm trained to believe the data that your different FDA, NIH, all these groups tell us without question. I don't do that anymore. And I'm sorry that I was trained that way, because maybe I could have pushed back harder or given more credence to other people who were saying maybe you shouldn't believe everything that these people are saying.
Are you going to continue to lobby for a review of how the situation was handled here in Bermuda?
I think I will continue to lobby. How much my words will have effect, I'm no longer the president of the Medical Doctors Association. I've resigned myself to say people want to move on. Those who want my opinion, I give it to them. I was never somebody who told anyone don't take the vaccine. I always was somebody who says, make a choice based upon educated, not just because so-and-so said it was okay.
That it had to be done. Let's change gears a bit and talk about the medical ethics and the changing landscape of healthcare here in Bermuda. We see the corporate healthcare consolidation as well. It's becoming a major concern, and you have spoken at length about it, particularly the mergers of major insurers and medical practices. How do you see this affecting patient choice and doctor autonomy?
Well, my training was in the United States. As such, I've seen this play out. And when I came back, there was one of the old guard, Dr. Burton Butterfield, who said, guys, you better be aware what's going on in the States is coming here. So said, so done. And in the States where we practiced, you were expected, because you worked for an institution, you were not, that patient wasn't yours, it was the institution's. The patient had the right to change institutions, but if they decided to have their insurance with this particular insurance company, or in the States, hospitals can buy practices. So if you were joined with this, you chose the institution, but not the doctor. I think the same thing will come here. You know, your doctor is only your doctor as long as he or she follows the rules of their bosses. They're no longer their own bosses. They're going to have to make quotas. They're going to have to do procedures to keep the bottom lines. I mean, these are businesses now. This isn't just a place where a patient goes to get healthy. This is a place that has to try to show a profit at the end of the quarter.
Yeah. How do you see that impacting doctor-patient relationship? Because, I mean, that is almost sacrosanct.
I laugh because I think back to my time when I was younger here, Bank of Bermuda, where, I got to go into the bank and you saw the teller and you put your little bank, book in and you said thank you. And then when I got a little older, my father introduced me to the manager and said, one day you're going to have to, you had that interaction, you had that personal knowledge. And now I have HSBC that says if I have more than 8 checks, I have to get out of line, go back to the end of the line to go back in because, they don't want to hold up the line. That's how medicine's going to go. I mean, in larger institutions, even in places like Canada and England where they have quote unquote national health, you have a 7-minute visit. I have some older patients that take 10 minutes to walk into the room. What kind of true good quality care can you give somebody when you're on a clock? It's just not practical. So
do you subscribe to the notion of national health care?
No, I haven't seen that work yet. Plus, I think the whole idea behind, I hate the term equity and fairness. It's a good tagline on TV, but practically, what does that mean when it comes to Bermudian healthcare? I used to brag about Bermuda healthcare when I was in the States because, even the poorest person could get put on financial assistance, could get put on HIP or future care and get access to the same quality care as anybody else. Whereas in other states, you have clinic care, which is government run, and private care. That's going to be the same thing here. You'll have privatized care, even though they keep saying they want to give those who have no insurance or underinsurance access to insurance. What has clearly been shown is that insurance doesn't equal good health. That's the problem. You haven't given people good health. You've just given them a mechanism to pay for a visit or pay for a hospitalization, but you haven't made your population healthy, and you haven't proved it either. The government, in fact, has proven the reverse, that they nationalized the hospital, and as you saw at the beginning of this week, the hospital's in bad shape financially. You have their employees who are hurting because they haven't had raise, and yet you have administration who makes $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 a year. That's how is that equity? I don't get it.
That's another discussion for another day. But let's come back to what we started talking about with the insurance companies and the changing landscape of healthcare here in Bermuda.
Right.
Would you say that the days of the private practice perhaps are numbered?
We're becoming dinosaurs. It becomes less and less feasible to be a private solo practitioner and be able to make a profit. And that's not a bad word. Most of us took at least 8 years plus to get to where we are. We spent many nights away from our families. We did horrible procedures and things that patients to this day run in the opposite direction from us. It was the reimbursement for that and the skills that came with it should be reimbursed. So I don't have a problem with doctors being paid for what they do. The problem becomes, how are you going to do that when you have malpractice, when you have to pay for your medical license, when you have to pay the Bermuda Health Council for your license to open up a building? when you're paying for now PIPA, because now to qualify for PIPA, you need a whole other set of people to come in and do that. When you have to pay a billing person, it just keeps trickling over and over, and it reduces the ability where you say, this isn't fun, nor is it really worth it. That's why a lot of doctors will decide, in the end, I'll just go work for somebody. I would like to take care of this person the way I like, but in the end, I got a family to feed, I got a mortgage to pay. Bermuda's expensive.
And responsibilities take priority, of course.
Amen.
Now, the concern of profit-driven healthcare isn't something that's, Bermudian. It's international. How do we strike a balance, though, here between a sustainable healthcare system and one that prioritizes patient well-being over corporate interests? Is that too going to become a thing of the past?
I find it's going to be very difficult because who monitors how these places are doing what they do? Even the government. The government is looking at trying to be another player in this whole healthcare scheme, but who will overlook their shoulders? Nobody. They'll look over their own shoulders. And the problem becomes that right now, insurance companies and the hospitals are the same as banks back in the early 2000s in the United States. They're too big to fail, and therefore they have the ability to do what they will, and the government simply has to take it.
Do you really think that is how it's going to play out?
It's played out like that way already. I mean, the recent legislation that was put forward where the Minister of Health has the ability to request any data from basically any health care institution, that is basically a nice way of going after the insurance companies. The insurance companies were doing that all this time. It's not a new concept. Part of their whole mandate was when we see you or whomever, there is a billing code that tells us what level of service we did, and then there's a diagnosis code that said what kind of diagnosis you had. Every insurer here has all of those codes. They have them based upon gender, race, age, demographic, all of that data's there. And up until recently, they would provide that to the Bermuda Health Council. That was part of the Bermuda Health Council's job, is to collect that data, sort through it, and be able to somehow be able to figure out how we're doing health-wise. And then at some point, the insurance companies decided not to do that anymore. And what is the punishment? I mean, technically, the Bermuda Health Council gives them their license. They could pull their license. Are you willing to have your insurance company's license pulled?
Well, I don't see that happening at all. But
exactly.
How do you propose doctors then, and other healthcare professionals, other healthcare providers who want to practice medicine with integrity, but they feel pressured to not only follow policies they may not fully agree with, but they perhaps disagree with totally?
Right. I think disagreement comes in different forms. You have a disagreement. I think if there's a crossing of the line ethically, then sometimes it doesn't matter what you have to lose.
But is that line being blurred now? Is that ethics, the ethics that would have informed how medicine is practiced, are those ethics now being dwindled, done away with?
So we have to be very careful in terms of ethics versus morals. Ethics is kind of a man-made set of rules that we all agree is correct. Morals come from a greater source than any of us can talk about. So, if we had a conversation just 10 years ago about the ethics of gender care, there wouldn't have been any question about doing to children and people what we do now and don't even blink. But those lines have been blurred. And there are doctors who either are willing to do things that they wouldn't have done before, and there are others who just simply keep their mouths closed to be able to, once again, keep your lights on. That, as you see, is shifting again. So the ethical frameworks sometimes have become very much, we have DEI in medical school now that, you can't even pass medical school unless you're willing to agree to certain belief systems that had nothing to do with medicine. If I had to do this again, I don't know if I would do this.
Probably be an engineer.
I'll leave that to my son.
If we were to face another health crisis, and there is a new COVID, quote unquote, that they're saying that's going to come to the fore shortly, and has already been detected in China, I don't know how true that is. And I'm not a conspiracy theorist by any stretch of the imagination.
Neither was I.
But if we were to face a similar health crisis in the future, and this whole question of ethics again, what key ethical principles should guide decision making to avoid the mistakes that we made dealing with this last situation, this last experience?
I think you cannot stop the soldiers from doing what they do. You know, we told doctors to not treat patients. We told doctors who are used to trying whatever it takes, going above and beyond the status quo and the regular framework. We told them to tell your patients, stay home until you can't breathe and then go to the emergency room. That was criminal. That was criminal. Now, it was also standard across the whole world, but that didn't make it right. And Bermuda had a choice. They didn't have to follow that. But, you know, when you have people who don't have medical background, taking advice from other politicians and political groups.
But did Bermuda have a choice, though? Because you couldn't travel to the States without getting the vaccine. You couldn't travel to England, to Europe without getting the vaccine.
I agree. I myself got vaccinated so that I could see my family who wasn't living here. Not for my health, but for a card. Many people did that. That's criminal in itself. But I did it knowing the risk that I was taking.
That was associated
and believe me, I
with
sat in my car for an hour and a half in a CVS parking lot thinking, you know, I haven't told my family I'm doing this because they won't let me otherwise. What happens if? But for me, it was a choice of either, you know, be with my family, because at that time, Joe Biden said that if you're not vaccinated and you're not American, you can't come back to the United States. And so I made that call. There were a lot of people, however, said, well, my doctor says it's safe, so it's safe. End of story.
Blind faith.
Blind faith.
What lessons do you think this experience has taught? Well, let me keep it specific to you. Has it taught you about faith, resilience, and the role of truth in medicine?
That's a lot in that question. Well, I mean, you know, I think my faith does not lie in an organization that has a whole bunch of alphabets in it anymore. That's done. I very much will read everything I can before I make that judgment, but it won't be simply because this organization has put their seal of approval behind it. I'm going with it. It's difficult sometimes with patients because I don't want patients to feel that they're pressured by me to not do something because they've decided to do it either. So it's a fine line that I walk between, because I have some patients that say, like, I know you didn't want me to take the vaccine, versus I know you wanted me to understand, you know, because otherwise what happens is they stay away or they do something behind the scenes that could endanger themselves even more. I want to be their advocate and not their jailer. That's the thing. And I think that if nothing else, we can no longer, I have 4 children. That's it. My patients are not my children. I'm not there to tell them what to do. I'm there to advise them based upon as much knowledge as I have. And then we work through what your decision will be. That's the best I can do.
If you were to sit down with the authorities to talk about how this thing should be addressed, review what happened and come up with a plan going forward for if we had to deal with this eventuality again, as we may well have to, what would you say to them?
And I think I would say you need a bigger pool of people to draw your decisions from. You cannot just bring in people that go along with what you feel you want to do, so that when they say you're right, you feel somehow empowered. The minute somebody disagrees with you, you cut them out of the system. And that's how it's been for a long time. That's not a PLP or an OBA thing. That's a government thing.
Yes.
That's a rule. And that is not the way that you actually take care of your people, because there are many different, especially in health, what is true today, and you talked about truth, might not be true tomorrow based upon what we know. So you cannot force people to adopt something without be willing to pay the price if you're wrong. And that's the problem, that most governments, including ours, were not willing to accept the consequence if they were proven wrong. Because I still have patients who are still suffering from taking the vaccine, and they have no way of being compensated for that. And let alone being shown that they have actually been hurt by it versus being told that it's something else.
So you think in a few years down the road, we're going to see one of those, if you've been exposed to asbestos ads in relation to COVID vaccines?
I've had a patient one time that said that they will not get in a relationship with somebody who's been vaccinated. So they do the opposite now because they're worried about shedding from that person to their body. They're very proud that they didn't get vaccinated, and they don't want to be exposed to what the vaccinated person did. I think both of those things are a little bit too far on a field of where truth lies somewhere in that middle.
What is your message to Bermudians about how we move forward?
Take the responsibility of your health back from institutions. I recently moved to HIP. I said, you know what? My insurance is too expensive. What I'm getting from this, and I didn't even actually know how much I could get out of it. But when I looked through the documents, once again, educating myself, I said, okay, $500 versus $1,500. I can take half of the savings and put it aside for things that I want to invest in my health with. People, I think, sometimes are overinsured, and it's always different when you're not paying that bill. And that's the problem a lot of times, is that we give people a sense of security based upon the fact that they're not paying that bill. It's always easier to use somebody else's money to do something than your own. People are a lot more invested when you give them money and say, take care of your health. Then they choose, do I want that x-ray? Do I want that blood test? Versus, do I need it? Versus, if it's not costing them anything, I have people that come in and say, I want an MRI, hurt my leg. Well, what's the MRI going to do? Do you think you need surgery? Oh, I don't want surgery. I just want an MRI, because they're not paying that bill. But if you're paying for it, it's like a lottery. How many people who have won the lottery are broke today because they didn't work for it? You have to work for our health.
It came easily, so it goes easily.
Exactly.
Easy go type thing.
Very true.
Bermudians who would have taken the vaccine as opposed to those who didn't, do you think the ones that actually didn't take the vaccine should feel, vindicated today? Or justified in the position that they adopted?
I think they can feel vindicated. I don't think they should feel superior, because once again, people took the vaccine for many different reasons. And I don't think they should be shamed any more than the reverse, how it was during that time where the people who didn't were made to feel somehow that they were killing grandma. That was just as bad as doing a lot of things that were done to them.
So how do you think locals can ensure medical freedom moving forward? That's one of the major things that we need to address, so that individuals are never again placed in a position where they feel like, they're forced to make a personal health decision. You had to do it. You took a decision because you wanted to be able to see your family. I took a decision because I wanted to go see my kids in school.
Mm-hmm. I mean, like you said, there are certain things that we do not control outside of our island. If the rest of the world decides to ban us from traveling, if we do not do as they say, we don't have control over that. But I think Bermuda has control within the Bermuda island.
Yes.
And we have to be very aware of the risk of doing anything just because the rest of the world does. There are Denmark and Sweden and those parts of the world decided to not necessarily lock down. Did they have deaths? Yes, but their school systems didn't get hurt. The young people who have cardiac disease from taking the vaccine are not on their shores. There's fallout for everything. And you have to be willing to say, are we willing to pay the price later for something now, or are we going to just decide to take the hit now and avoid the pain?
The wearing of the masks, speaking with an educator, they were saying to me that they have found since COVID, children are coming to school with more speech impediments than they did in the past, because when children learn to speak, they look at the lips, they look at the formation of the words. With the wearing of the masks, that was
That was taken from them.
significantly reduced.
That was taken from them, very much so. Once again, criminal. It should have never been, and maybe it wasn't forced. It wasn't a government force, but it wasn't also told from the government, don't do it either. It was something that fear makes people do scary things. And that's the problem.
We were scared into making the decisions that we did, you think?
There you go. I had to move my son off island because the schools closing down as many times as they did, he was going backwards. And he's an A student. I had to move him to a place where the schools were open, where they only closed with only very large amounts of COVID, because young people catch every single thing all the time. Their bodies were used to it. So you didn't have to shut the whole thing down. And he did fine. Thank God he did fine. It took a hit, but yeah, that's just the way it is. And even going to universities, when we were looking for universities for him, and you would tour these universities, I quickly took universities off the list and said, sir, can you put this mask on? I'm like, nah, we're not going to do that. Cross it off. What, Dad? I'm like, yeah, it's a great institution, but I'm not going to do that because this same school is going to want you to inject yourself. I'm not losing my son for this. I'm sorry.
Not willing to take that risk.
Nope, not at all.
For those who took the vaccine but now have questions as to what the long-term effects were, what would you advise them? Don't say I told you so, because I'm sure you will.
No, because I didn't tell them so. That's why. I mean, there are certain protocols that are now being instituted to try to help them overcome some of their vaccine injuries. They can look at the FLCCC website, Dr. McCullough's website. Those are two main ones that I go to at least get a start. And then you try to see if you have a doctor here. Maybe your doctor's open to it, and they don't have to buy in, but they shouldn't have to push you away either. And if not, there are a few of us out there that are willing to work with people who are just trying to find another way other than the standard routine. Unfortunately, insurance companies play a role in that too. I mean, during the time when this first started, I was one of the people who used ivermectin. That was the drug that should not be named. But it was available. The data that I saw was very keen on actually showing a benefit. And there were many people who we were able to keep out of the hospital. And then the insurance companies decided we're not paying for it. And so what would have been something that would have been easy for somebody to try without any real downside, all of a sudden you locked out people who couldn't afford it. The same group of people who you claim you're trying to help with national health, you didn't push back against insurance companies to say, well, wait a minute, you'll pay for this drug under every other circumstance, but not this. We're not allowing you to do this to our population.
So how do we then look at assisting those or providing, because as you mentioned, you have people who are still showing symptoms or from having taken the vaccine, or is from having taken the vaccine or from COVID?
Sometimes both. Remember, the issue is your level of spike protein. If COVID deposited a large amount of spike protein, some people got very sick from COVID for whatever reason, their immune system. What did we know? We knew people who had morbid obesity, people who had chronic medical illnesses. Those are people who have already an immune compromised state. So now they have those people, if they caught the flu, are going to have a really bad case of it. Those who get cancer, they're going to have a really bad case of it. Versus those of us who had good, strong immune systems were not as badly affected by it. So you have to find a way to get your immune system to push back against spike protein, whether the spike protein is from the vaccine or from the illness itself.
Well, let me come back to the question I was originally asking. So how do we support people who have suffered from vaccine injuries or even economic losses due to the mandates that they were forced to adhere to?
Totally. The economic part. Economics, whoo, that's a whole other state. Well, see, the problem becomes that Bermuda was under such a situation that if you were shown and proven to be injured by a vaccine, the course of action was to take it up with the motherland. And they themselves are having problems with their own population being able to recoup any kind of financial recompensation for that. So we're really in bad shape when it comes to financially getting some kind of justification for not following like everybody else, right or wrong. When it comes to their health care, like I said, I think they should be seeking out every possibility of non-traditional health, because most of this right now, when COVID first came out, we said quite clearly, we've never been able to treat viruses. Most people think just throw an antibiotic. Antibiotics are for bacteria, they're not for viruses. So this wasn't that different. This was another virus that we can't simply give you a drug for. The best we can do is get your immune system to the point that it shall be the thing that gets rid of that virus. There are still people today who are still obese. There's still people who smoke. There's still people who haven't gotten their diabetes. The same thing that put you at risk for COVID then, put you at risk for whatever the new COVID or bird flu or whatever it is. That's your responsibility. The government's not going to fix that for you.
Give us some free health advice on how to deal with these situations before you leave.
As old-fashioned it may seem, proper rest, a lot of water, real food, and lose some weight. Exercise, get moving. There are people who find reasons why they don't move more than they find reasons to move. We have become an obese nation. That's coming with a cost financially that our country won't be able to afford without great sacrifice. And unless we get a handle on somehow taking better control of our life, stop giving it to your bosses, stop giving it to your government, start enjoying. I actually got better exercise during COVID lockdown because I got to go and mow my grass by hand and cut my trees and stuff. I didn't have to go to a gym to get workouts. And I think people have to kind of go backwards to go forward. They have to go back to some of the way some of our ancestors did stuff. It worked, and it still works.
Thank you kindly.
You're welcome, sir.
Yep. Dr. Dowling, thank you once again for chatting with us. We truly appreciate this, and the courage that you've shown and the leadership, that has not gone unnoticed. We look forward to constantly hearing your contributions, but most importantly, we really appreciate your efforts and those of other healthcare professionals who have banded with you and the unwavering commitment that you all have shown to patient care.
Thank you.
Now, as Bermuda, as we reflect on the lessons of the pandemic, we must not be afraid. We should not be afraid. We should not allow ourselves to be cowed against asking the hard questions, seeking the truth, and ensuring that the rights of you and the rest of the people that reside here are in fact respected.